Despite El Camino's efforts to provide closure for some of Breaking Bad's few lingering questions, there are still a few loose ends remaining at the end. Here are all the biggest questions that we're still asking after El Camino, a Breaking Bad movie. Although Walt's wife, Skyler, spent the first couple seasons of Breaking Bad unaware of his illegal dealings, she eventually joined him on the dark side when she began helping Walt to launder his money. By the end of the series, the pragmatic Skyler was up to her ears in illicit activity, adding tax fraud and obstruction of justice to her crimes, in addition to suggesting that Walt have Jesse Pinkman killed.
You need to deal with this.
How much have you had to drink?
Not nearly enough.
In the finale, Walt gave Skyler a lottery ticket with the coordinates for the location where the bodies of Hank Schrader and Steve Gomez were buried, thinking she could trade the information for immunity. However, that's the last we ever see of Skyler, and El Camino never mentions what became of her. We have no way of knowing whether Walt's last attempt to help his family paid off, or whether the bodies of two dead DEA agents was a big enough bargaining chip to get Skyler off the hook for her criminal misdeeds. Realizing that every penny he ever made selling meth would likely get seized by the DEA once they finished amassing evidence against him, Walt decides to give his money to his family via a more circuitous route. Visiting the luxurious home of his former business partners Elliot and Gretchen Schwartz, Walt gives them the $9.72 million he managed to hold onto after the rest of his fortune was seized by Uncle Jack and his gang of white supremacists. He instructs them to set up a trust for his son Walt Jr., which will be given to him on his 18th birthday as a gift from the Schwartzes. Walt then threatens them that if they fail to carry out his instructions, he has hired assassins to have them killed. However, Walt Jr.'s birthday was still 10 months away at the end of Felina, and El Camino leaves us with no way of knowing whether the Schwartzes carried out their end of the bargain. We do know that Walt's assassins were actually just Badger and Skinny Pete with laser pointers, so there wouldn't be any consequences if the Schwartzes decided to keep the money. Whether Gretchen and Elliot figured that out, though, we may never know. After Hank discovers the truth about Walt and arrests him, his wife Marie seems to relish forcing her sister to tell Walt Jr. the truth about Walt. However, Marie climbs off her high horse to support her sister when Walt captures baby Holly, only to be devastated again when she learns that Hank is killed. The last contact we see between Marie and Skyler is in the finale, when Marie calls to warn Skyler that Walt is back in town and cautions her to stay wary and safe.
On a 1,000,000 to 1 chance. You be on the lookout, okay?
It's implied during the conversation that the sisters haven't spoken in months. While the relationship between Skyler and Marie wasn't always the best, they seemed fairly close in the early seasons, living nearby and seeing each other often. It's probably safe to assume that their relationship will never be the same following the finale. However, we'll never see whether their relationship continued to heal or was severed for good, since neither sister is seen or mentioned in El Camino. In Felina, Walter White spends a lot of time paying back the people who have wronged him, but one of his most elaborate revenge schemes involves his judgment on Lydia Rodart Quayle. Lydia tries to conspire against Walt when he comes back to town, but Walt is several steps ahead and uses her own habits against her by poisoning the stevia she always used in her tea. The last we saw Lydia, she was looking significantly under the weather when she called Todd, thinking that her plan to kill Walt had been successfully carried out. Soon after, Walt tells her that not only had her plan failed, but that her illness was in fact the first stages of ricin poisoning. While Breaking Bad implied that Lydia was doomed, El Camino reveals that her fate may still be up in the air. At one point, Jesse hears a radio news report that mentions a Houston woman with possible ties to Walter White is in the hospital in critical condition and not expected to survive. However, while her odds don't look great, we'll never know for sure if Walt was successful in his attempt to get rid of her.
Well, goodbye, Lydia.
One of the most heartwarming parts of El Camino comes right at the beginning, when a traumatized Jesse turns to two of the only allies he has left, his longtime friends Skinny Pete and Badger. However, after Pete and Badger help Jesse, they hit a snag when they attempt to get rid of the El Camino that Jesse was driving. The LoJack was activated, meaning the police will arrive at Pete's house soon. Jesse offers to drive the El Camino away from the house, but Skinny Pete has another plan. Badger will abandon Pete's car near the Mexican border, Jesse will escape in Badger's car, and Pete will remain at his house with the El Camino. Pete and Badger also give Jesse all the money they have on them. After Jesse and Badger drive off, Pete moves the El Camino to the front of his driveway and waits for the police to arrive, showing that he has nothing to hide. While the teaser for El Camino seemed to pick up after this with Pete in the police station, the film itself never shows either of Jesse's friends again. We can only hope that Pete and Badger get to go home and keep working on their Star Trek spec script.
I ever tell you about my Star Trek script?
Star Trek script?
Yeah, I gotta write it down is all. The Enterprise.
In the penultimate scene of El Camino, as Jesse prepares to embark on his new life in Alaska, Ed the Disappearer asks him if there's anything else Jesse needs to take care of before the two part ways. Jesse hands him a letter, which Ed reads over and then promises to mail from Mexico City in a month. As Jesse drives away, the camera reveals that the letter is addressed to Brock Cantijo. Neither of them discuss what Jesse wrote in his final missive to Brock, although we can guess that at least part of his note was a farewell. The rest is left up to our imaginations. Perhaps Jesse tried to offer some sort of explanation or apology for what happened to his mother. It's also possible that Jesse used some of the money he took from Neil Candy to help provide for Brock's future, similar to the trust Walt managed to set up for his son. We may never know what Jesse's final words to Brock were, but no matter what he wrote, we're sure it came from the heart. The last we saw of Saul Goodman's intimidating bodyguard Huell toward the end of Breaking Bad, he was sitting in a DEA safe house, patiently awaiting the return of Hank Schrader and Steve Gomez. Unfortunately for everyone, Hank and Steve were killed by Jack Welker and his gang shortly thereafter, so they would never return to the safe house to advise Huell on next steps. According to series creator Vince Gilligan, Huell would have eventually been found, questioned, and ultimately released by other DEA agents. But that's not really good enough for fans who hope to see Huell's fate definitively addressed in canon. The official Breaking Bad Facebook page took it one step further, sharing a video of Huell getting up and leaving the safe house to coincide with the release of El Camino. Still, Huell failed to get a cameo or even a mention in the movie itself. Even if we consider the Facebook video part of the film, all it establishes is that Huell eventually left the safe house. We have no idea where he went or what he's up to now, and El Camino doesn't give us any clues. The other long-suffering employee in the office of Saul Goodman and Associates is Francesca Lydia, who we last saw toward the end of Breaking Bad's final season, when she was held at gunpoint by Jesse Pinkman. Although Huell was later picked up by the DEA, we never learned what became of Francesca after Saul fled Albuquerque and Saul Goodman and Associates was no more. In the Breaking Bad spin-off series Better Call Saul, we learned that Francesca was once a bright-eyed and enthusiastic former employee of New Mexico's Motor Vehicle Division. Somehow, over her years working with Saul, she became jaded and cynical. We wondered whether we might see her pop up in El Camino, but the former receptionist accomplice didn't receive a mention in the Jesse-centric tale. We're not sure what professional opportunities are out there for a secretary who spent the last decade of her life working for a shady criminal lawyer who's currently wanted by the DEA. Still, Better Call Saul did leave us with a few clues for where Francesca goes after the events of Breaking Bad. In the spin-off, we see that Saul gives Francesca the business card of a lawyer from his Jimmy McGill days. We may find out what happened to Francesca in an upcoming season of BCS. For the viewers of Better Call Saul, we've gotten a small glimpse into what Saul Goodman, formerly known as Jimmy McGill, is up to following the events of Breaking Bad. The last we saw him in Breaking Bad, Saul was preparing to embark on a new life in Nebraska, courtesy of Ed the Disappearer. In Better Call Saul, we see that in his new life, Saul is known as Gene, and he works at a Cinnabon in Omaha. Still afraid of the enemies he made through his association with Walt, Gene lives in a constant state of anxiety and paranoia. While we may eventually get a more complete picture of what Saul's life looks like following Breaking Bad, El Camino didn't offer up any clues. The only obscure nod to Saul Goodman is a brief shot of the strip mall that once housed his law office, which has since been turned into a sports bar. Neither Jesse nor Ed ever discuss what became of the disgraced former lawyer, and although Better Call Saul fills in the blanks a little bit, there's still plenty we don't know about Saul's life following Breaking Bad. But if there's one thing we know about Saul Goodman, it's that as much as he may insist that he's left his former life behind him, he won't be able to keep his nose clean for long. Throughout Breaking Bad, although it was never stated outright, it was always implied that Jesse Pinkman dropped out of high school before graduating. We knew that he failed Mr. White's chemistry class as a junior, yet Jesse's parents still considered Walt one of Jesse's better teachers, implying that his F in chemistry was not an anomaly on his report card. However, in El Camino, Walt comments that Jesse might try college, suggesting a business and marketing degree as a counter to Jesse's proposal of sports medicine. But first, Walt says Jesse would have to get his GED, to which Jesse responds that he doesn't need a GED because he already has a high school diploma.
Yo, you were standing right on stage when they handed it to me.
I just slipped my mind.
I totally graduated high school.
Of course, now that Jesse has a new identity in Alaska as Mr. Driscoll, he likely won't be using his degree from J.P. Wynn High School on his application. But that doesn't mean he can't continue his education under his new name. If Jesse Pinkman had a completed high school education, then so does Mr. Driscoll. And although few of Walter White's ideas ever seem to be in Jesse's best interest, this one might be. El Camino doesn't tell us what happens to Jesse once he arrives in Alaska, but it's nice to think that if we were to catch up with him at some point in the distant future, we might find him with a successful career in sports medicine. If not that, maybe he can major in
Magnets! Oh!
Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.